Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll get started for those who are on time. I want to welcome you to another presentation in our CSDA Sunday series. Only for today, we're meeting on Saturday. We're very pleased to be partnering with the Textile Museum for today's event. My name is Susan Goletz, and I'm the chair of the program committee at the Canadian Society of Decorative Arts. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are all on lands traditionally occupied by Indigenous peoples who continue to care for this land and who continue to shape our country today. The CSDA is celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, as well as our 15th anniversary of our premier magazine, Ornamentum. Please watch for some special events that are intended to help all of us celebrate these two special anniversaries. If you'd like to learn more about the CSDA, or about our membership or subscriptions, you can visit us at www.csda-ccad.org. Very quickly, I have a couple of housekeeping notes before we start. Today, we're using a somewhat different way of bringing us all together. We're using a webinar format, which means only the panelists that you can see on this screen currently are able to use their mics. If you have any questions or comments, please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and you can find it when you run your mouse on your screen. We will have a Q&A at the end of Roxane's presentation, and I'll ask her questions on your behalf, and she'll respond. In addition, I do want to note that this presentation is being recorded. And finally, we include all attendees for this presentation on our mailing list for our free quarterly newsletter. If you would prefer not to receive this newsletter, simply unsubscribe when you receive your copy of it. And now for the presentation. I'd like to introduce Martha Wilder, who is a member of the program committee, and she will introduce our special guest today. Martha?
Hello, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Roxane Shaughnessy. Roxane is Senior Curator and Manager of the collection of the Textile Museum of Canada, where she leads the development and research of the museum's permanent collection of over 15,000 textiles and manages the digital assets. She has over 20 years of experience curating exhibitions from the collection, most recently printed textiles from Kinngait Dorset Studios 2019, which is what we are seeing today, and previously Ancestry and Artistry, Maya Textiles from Guatemala 2013. She holds a Master's of Arts in Anthropology and previously held positions at the Royal Ontario Museum and as president of the Textile Society of America. As a friend of the Textile Museum, I met Roxane at various events there, and I'm an enthusiastic supporter of the work she and her colleagues do. So today, I'm delighted that our two organizations have partnered to bring you this event, and look forward to hearing Roxane speak about these wonderful textiles from Kinngait Studios. Thank you, Roxane.
Thank you very much, Susan and Martha. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to speak about the exhibition Printed Textiles from Kinngait Studios, which opened in December 2019 at the Textile Museum of Canada. I would like to thank our partner, the Canadian Society of Decorative Arts, for inviting me to speak and for partnering with the Textile Museum in the presentation of this event. Welcome to CSDA and Textile Museum members and all our participants who are joining us today. The exhibition presents the little-known story of a group of Inuit artists and printmakers who produced a collection of graphic textiles in Kinngait, Cape Dorset, formerly Cape Dorset, Nunavut, in the 1950s and 60s, a period of social change that disrupted traditional language and relationships to the land. The cotton and linen fabrics with bold designs are a physical record of a relatively short-lived experimental initiative undertaken during the early days of the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, when Kingait's famous print program was just beginning. The exhibition, Printed Textiles from Kinngait Studios, traces the development and impact of this fabric printing initiative on the history of Kingait's visual culture and explores its continued relevance through the work of Inuit artists and fashion designers today. I would like to acknowledge our project partner, the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, William Huffman of Dorset Fine Arts, our sponsors, supporters, funders, lenders, catalog advisors, consultants, and contributors. Just a note to say that in the 1970s, the term Eskimo was replaced by Inuit in the Eastern Arctic and is used here only when citing historical sources. And now we'll start with a video to give you an introduction to the exhibition project.
People from South Baffin and Kinngait means that these people live in a very isolated area where the ice don't totally freeze over, always open water around, even in the entire cold weather.
This project, which is now a massive, massive undertaking, began so humbly from a series of storage boxes discovered at the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative offices in Kinngait and in Toronto. Since its beginnings, the cooperative is a community-owned organization governed by a fully Inuit board of directors. The organization operates the oldest fine art print studio in Canada, and each fall since 1959, we release a superb collection of prints. In 1978, the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative Board realized its vision of establishing a Toronto location, which continues to manage the distribution of artwork, outreach, communications, advocacy, maintains local, national, and international partnerships, like certainly this unique relationship that we have with the Textile Museum.
The story of this remarkable hand-printed textile initiative that took place over 60 years ago has resurgent relevance today. These textiles provide vital points of connection between the contemporary Inuit community members and the creativity and resourcefulness of the artists and printmakers of previous generations, and demonstrate the importance of printed fabrics in the ongoing evolution of Inuit graphic arts.
Really happy to have contributed because I feel like having Inuit voices heard is very important, especially when you come into this place and you see this artwork and it's made by Inuit. So it's important that there's also Inuit contributing to its representation in galleries and in literature. So I'm really working towards developing my writing style and making sure any voices are there.
My sister Lily did a lot of sewing and she taught me and she inspired me. And my grandmother, she got blind in her later age, but she continued to sew and I would watch her sewing and she would cut a pattern just using her hand. And Inuit traditional ways of measurements was through hand. And she used that and I would watch her. So she would cut a pattern and she's blind, just feeling everything. And the only thing that she needed help was putting the thread in the needle, and she would sew with those sewing machines.
If you don't have this, or if you don't have that, then make it out of something else. Make do with what you have. It's one of the most beautiful things inherently in each quality. That's where a lot of the magic comes from. I think each of us has it. Part of it is definitely handed down from the generation.
I'm really happy to see that, First Nation design and music and everything like that is really starting to rise, which is something that was taken away from us like in the 50s, and for First Nations a lot earlier, weren't even allowed to perform certain music and stuff like that. And so this new wave of kind of bringing it back with such attitude, almost aggressively, because it was almost taken away from us. So we're super proud to show it off. That it's still here. It's such a powerful thing.
Okay, apologies about that, about the sound, but let's begin in 2016, and I will tell you about how the Textile Museum got involved in this project. In November of that year, Curatorial Director Sarah Quinton and I, along with former staff member Anna Richard, were invited to Dorset Fine Arts by William Huffman, the marketing manager, to view a recently rediscovered collection of textiles. The textiles had come down from Kinngait Studios in Kinngait and had been placed in storage at DFA, which is the marketing arm of the West Baffin Co-op. We arrived to find dozens of pieces of printed cloth featuring patterns by well-known Kinngait artists. Produced over 60 years ago, designs by Parr, Mary Samueli Pudlat, and others remained vibrant, engaging, and expressive of the deeply felt connection between the artists and their environment. We were immediately captivated and drawn to learn more about the story behind the cloth. Several months later, we had the opportunity to view a collection of 20 Inuit fabrics that were put up for auction at Waddington's in May 2017. According to their auction catalog, a collection of experimental fabrics made in Cape Dorset in the 1960s was discovered in a box in an attic, likely sealed and forgotten some 50 years ago. And this piece here is Little Hawks by Ilau Pingwartok. Almost all the designs in the slot were identical to examples in the Dorset Fine Arts collection, but also had the artists' names and titles of the designs printed on the selvages, unlike those in the museum, where the majority have no printed identifications. Krista Wimet, Waddington's Inuit art specialist at the time, generously shared the images of the textiles with us, which helped us to identify through comparison those artists who created the same designs in the Kinngait collection at the museum. The auction sparked a great deal of interest, and this lot set an unprecedented price at auction. With the estimate set at $1,000 to $1,500, the realized sale was $10,200. In August 2017, William Huffman arranged for the collection of close to 200 Inuit printed textiles to be transferred from Dorset Fine Arts to the Textile Museum of Canada. And the museum subsequently reached an agreement with our project partner, the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, to accept the collection as a long-term loan. As stewards of these fabrics, we have embraced the responsibility of creating broad access to the collection in the North and the South, developing a touring exhibition, catalog, online resources, educational tools, and programming, while ensuring ongoing community consultation and engagement. We proceeded to undertake extensive archival research, material and technical analysis, and reached out to individuals with knowledge of the fabric printing initiative and the print studios. We had conversations with many who generously contributed their knowledge and invited them to the museum to see the collection. We shared what we had discovered about the fabric printing, and through ongoing dialogue, the story of these textiles began to emerge. Supported with funding from Museums Assistance Program of Canadian Heritage, we began visualizing the exhibition and catalog. From the beginning, involving the Kinngait community has been essential in the development of this project. Though Kinngait Studios, now located in the new Kinooyuwat Cultural Center, the blue building on the top, in Kinngait, Nunavut, operated by the West Baffin Eskimo Cooperative, is recognized for its successful printmaking program and for the originality of its prints. And today, drawings and limited edition prints are made by the WBEC member artists and produced in Kinngait Studios. Little has been recorded about the remarkable hand-printed initiative that took place in the studios during the 1950s and 60s. The bold, graphic cotton and linen fabrics are a physical record of a short-lived experiment undertaken in the early days of the WBEC, when Kingait's famous print program was just beginning. Made for interior decor during a period when artist-designed textiles were popular in North America and Europe, these mid-century designs depict legends, stories, and traditional ways of life. Unlike the stone sculptures and prints also created during this period, the place and importance of these printed textiles in the history of Inuit cultural heritage has yet to be fully recognized. Involving the Kinngait community has been essential in the research and development of this exhibition, and we've relied on community insights to identify authorship, establish provenance, and to understand the crucial contexts of this experimental period of printmaking. I was fortunate to visit Kinngait in 2018 and again in 2019, this time with Curatorial Project Coordinator Alexandria Holm. Through community gatherings at the Kinooyuwat Cultural Center and the Peter Pitzelak High School, along with informal conversations with members of the community, I was able to share our research, images of the fabrics, and historic photographs with the artists, printmakers, and community members, who brought valuable new insights. After seeing the images of the 60-year-old fabrics for the first time, several participants recognized works made by their relatives and spoke with enthusiasm about their family members. Johnny Putaguk, Kinngait Studios artist and the son of Kanangana Putaguk, artist and lead printer of the textiles, said, quote, "I was surprised that he was working on such things like that. I only knew him as a lithographer or stonecutter, but not working on fabrics. So I was surprised to see that. Yes, I remember having a curtain like those fabrics with someone's design, and I think it was Kinooyuwat's work." At the high school presentation, Kinngait Studios artist Malaya Putaguk, who sadly recently passed away, expressed her interest and excitement at seeing fabrics designed by Pitzelak Ashuna, her great-grandmother. In December 2019, Cape Dorset joined many other Nunavut communities in reverting back to a traditional community name. In a plebiscite the community voted to stop using the name Cape Dorset in favor of Kinngait, where the hills are. Kinngait has a population of around 1,500 and is situated on Dorset Island, one of a series of small islands connected at low tide to Baffin Island in Nunavut. During the 20th century, in the Canadian Arctic, government policies and the arrival of Hudson Bay Company forced dramatic changes to the Inuit way of life, and families went from living on the land to living in settlements. In Kinngait, the settlement grew up around the Hudson's Bay Company post, and by the 1950s, most Inuit families were no longer able to sustain themselves through fur trading. Building on a centuries-old Inuit graphic tradition, printmaking was introduced in Kinngait in 1957 as part of a larger government program initiated by James Houston, an artist and civil administrator, to encourage handicraft production for sale in the South. As an economic incentive for Inuit who were making the transition from subsistence hunting and trapping to a wage economy in settled communities. During this official period of cultural upheaval, Inuit scholar and curator Heather Igloliarte maintains that it was the Inuit artists who preserved much of the intergenerational knowledge by recording in their artworks what they were discouraged from or forbidden to practice in their communities: legends, spirit world, and oral histories, now accessed through stone sculpture and graphic print and textile arts. As Martha Kiak, Inuit artist and fashion designer, observes, back then Inuit were more grounded in their culture and their beliefs in the spirit world. By the 1960s, the West Baffin Eskimo Co-op Studio, a majority-run Inuit business, had a number of Inuit artists who regularly contributed to the Kinngait print program, which included a commercial hand-printed fabric enterprise. However, the origins of Inuit printmaking go further back in time and the roots of this program built upon existing textile and graphic traditions. Since 1948, James Houston had been working to establish a formal marketing structure for Inuit art, which at that time included mainly stone and ivory sculpture, basketry, and sewn handicrafts. Among the handicrafts produced were skin pictures, which were an important antecedent to paper printmaking. Made with meticulous workmanship, women produced purses and skin pictures constructed of appliqued or inlaid cutout images of animals and objects, made from bleached and unbleached seal or caribou skin sewn onto a background. These skin pictures were produced from at least 1951, and some effort was made to market them. The transition towards a print studio took a major step forward in 1956, when a craft center known locally as Sinanguavik, the place where things are made, was built in Kinngait. The first effort by Northern Affairs and National Resources to organize and expand the development of handicraft production in the Eastern Arctic, which had become an important source of income for Inuit in the region. According to Leslie Boyd, the first experiments in printmaking were likely intended as a step towards the manufacture of printed products, such as hand-blocked fabrics using Inuit designs. In the newly built center, Houston, along with Ossiatokapili and Kanagana Putuguk, began to experiment with fabric and paper printing. The idea of fabric printing actually predated the paper printing that Kinngait Studios has become so famous for. In 1956, a meeting of the Canadian Handicrafts Guild, James Houston explained his plan to, quote, teach 12 Eskimos to make stone blocks for use in hand blocking yard goods, using designs native in character, unquote, and showed the Guild some preliminary samples of block printed fabric with Arctic themed designs, which the studio had been working on during the spring of that year. As a logical extension of the fabric block printing done in 1956, in 1957, the studio began printing paper gift cards and wrapping paper in its efforts to produce low-cost but handmade sale items. The craft experiments continued, and one of the studio's earliest known fine art prints is 3 caribou, designed by Niviasi and printed using the stone block method by Kanagana Putuguk, dated November 20th, 1957. Further experimentation with techniques and materials were inspired by a trip Houston made to Japan in 1958, where he studied block and stencil printmaking with Japanese master Unichai Hiratsuku. When Houston returned, he brought Japanese printmaking tools and paper washi to Kinngait and shared what he had learned in Japan with the printmakers. As Norman Ferrano noted, after Houston's return, stenciling in the print studio assumed a more central role. It not only emboldened the studio printers with greater possibilities for color stencil, but also influenced the early stages of fabric printing, when stencils were used as a standalone technique. Here in a photograph taken in 1959 in the Kinngait Studios shows printers working on a fabric with repeating Arctic motifs, including polar bears, caribou, and igloos, using stencils and brushes to apply the color. Although James Houston initiated the program, it was Terry Ryan who worked with the artists to ensure its continued success. Hired by the co-op in 1960, he provided the organization with more than 30 years of continuous leadership and astute advice. Although James Houston initiated the program, it was Terry Ryan who worked with the new artists. Fabric printing was only one of the many initiatives Ryan promoted while managing the growth of the co-op. Pottery, jewelry, weaving, and hooked rugs were also tried, as Ryan sought to engage members in new types of expression and develop the co-op into an art center. In the mid-1960s, the efforts of Ryan and others to market the fabrics to the public, where they were enthusiastically received, inspired the development of other fabric experiments, including applique wall hangings in Kwamanituak or Baker Lake in Nunavut, and batik in Puvernatuck in Nunavut, demonstrating the far-reaching impact of the original textile program and artists in other communities. We have installed in textiles from these later fabric initiatives, including an applique wall hanging on the wall on the right by Janet Anoutlik Nunik from Kwamanituak, Baker Lake, and batiks from Puvernatuck, Nunavut, loaned by the Museum Cerny Inuit collection. And the artists Jose Papialuk and Annie McPagic are featured here. So I'm going to describe a little bit of what we have learned about the printing experiments that took place. The printing experiments were carried out on a variety of fabrics in the collection. The majority of prints are on linen, followed by cotton sateen twill, unbleached cotton, muslin, ramie, white polyester cotton broadcloth with starch, dyed polyester cotton broadcloth, rayon, sheer cotton, and various plain weave cotton fabrics. As printmaking tools and equipment were not readily available in the Arctic, during the period of experimentation, printmakers developed various innovative approaches to fashion tools and test techniques. Linoleum tiles glued onto a thin wooden backing on which a design was carved were used for hand printing. And heavy paper impregnated with candle wax was used in making stencils. And here, Jimmy Manning, former Kinngait Studios manager, describes the experiments with stencils. I started working in the studio in 1971, so things were changing then from 1960. In 1971, we were starting to get more into different methods of making prints, like lithography, in the mid-70s, and then finding more different materials. Sorry. The printmakers always tried to experiment with different techniques. They tried sealskin stenciling, which didn't really work out. Cutout paper almost worked at the time, but because it only produced 1 or 2 images, and then the cutout line starts to get warped and damaged, it was unsuccessful. During that time, they tried to correct the problem, and so they tried waxing the paper, which really worked out for their needs. They made a waxing copper board with a little heater underneath, and then they burned the candle, an ordinary candle, on the copper, and when it got hot, then they would sponge the wax over the cutout paper stencil to make it stiffer. We saved the copper heater, and it now is in the Kinngait Cultural Center in the studios. As I mentioned, the earliest technique attempted was block printing, beginning in 1956. There are a few examples of block printing or stenciling in the collection. The remaining are silk screen printed. Designed by Ponachia is hand printed on unbleached cotton, likely using a stencil and brush technique, probably produced before the printmakers adopted the more efficient silkscreen method in 1963. In this experimental piece, the printmaker's hand is visible. There are smudges of colorant, and some of the repeat designs are unevenly placed, indicating a process of trial and error as printmakers persevered to produce a marketable product. And this example by Sheowak Patalus Lassi, also hand printed. This design became the West Baffin Eskimo cooperative symbol, which appears on published Kinngait Studios prints. Focused efforts towards silkscreen printing fabrics began in Kinngait in 1960, when 12 members of the co-op decided to expand their activities into a larger business and invested $30,000 from the sale of soapstone carvings and simple sketches to develop a commercial printed fabric enterprise. In the summer of 1963, Olga Tchaikovsky, a recent graduate from the Ontario College of Art and Material Art and Design program, was hired to travel to Kinngait to teach Inuit printers to silkscreen designs from fabric. Tchaikovsky was originally scheduled to stay for the summer, but the members of the co-op were so interested in this technique that she remained into the fall and worked specifically with Kinangana. For the next 2 years, Kinangana and other printers continued to experiment. Kinangana was particularly adept and perfected his knowledge of the silkscreen technique and is responsible for printing the group of designs that won National Design Awards later on. We learned the designs themselves were typically crafted by the printmakers, led by Kinangana, who selected motifs from drawings artists brought to the co-op for sale and translated them into patterns for yardage production. Parr's Proud Geese, screen printed on cotton sateen twill, demonstrates the effective use of a single graphic image repeated in vertical columns in alternate colors to create a striking design. In the gallery, Parr's 1963 stone-cut print on paper, Geese, Dog, and Walrus, is displayed adjacent to the fabric, showing the relationship between the original image and the fabric. And here's another example with a Ishahungato Putaguk, stone-cut print, Flight of Moors, and the fabric, Birds in Flight. In another excerpt from our interview with Jimmy Manning, he described how the relationship between the artists and the studios evolved. And in our time, we were hardly ever working together with the artists, as they were working all the time at home. Then one day we started to see if they were willing to come to the studio, and some really liked the idea because they didn't want to get interrupted by their small kids, pouring water or damaging the drawing while they went for a cigarette and all that. So that was our goal. We wanted them closer to us because we were always working with their images, so we could ask them directly in the studio. This image from the studios is one of the screens that was used to make prints in Kinngait, and the design, as you can see on the right, is by an unidentified artist and is in the TMC collection. These few slides are unfinished experimental pieces which illustrate the different stages of screen printing. The pieces are a valuable source of information on the experimental processes used by the printmakers. Inventive and enterprising, they worked together tirelessly and experimented with limited resources under challenging conditions. During this period of experimentation, as techniques and tools developed in the late 50s, some printmakers were working with both paper and fabric as they translated drawings into finished prints. The process of developing printed fabrics into a marketable product was inextricably linked to the production of prints and an essential part of the story of the evolution of the broader print culture of Kinngait. There are 95 individual designs in the fabric collection, and we have identified the work of 16 artists. These artists were, for the most part, well-known, established print artists. Kinangait Putuguk, a hunter, carver, engraver, and expert textile printer, was one of the first to work on prints, and he was joined by Oshituk Apile, Iola, Kingwatsiak, Igavukluk, Putuguk, and Lukta Kiatsuk. These men formed the core group of printmakers who produced most of the early print media, and some of them worked with Kinangait on fabric printing. During this period of experimentation, all the fabrics and printing supplies had to be shipped to Kinngait. The need to adapt to what supplies were available illustrates not only the challenges of printing in the North, but also the endless resourcefulness of the printmakers. According to the Canadian Industrial Designs database, there were 51 designs registered by the co-op between 1965 and 1969. 28 of those are represented in the collection. As we have identified 95 individual designs, that could suggest that a large portion of the collection consists of experimental designs that may never have been put into production. And these are some of the registered. The majority of the designs in the collection are by yet unidentified artists. Further research should help determine the artists whose images were used. I'm going to share some information on where and how the fabrics were marketed in the mid-60s and the evolution of the experiment from hand-printed yardage to fashion design in the 1970s. I'd like to acknowledge Anna Richard, my co-author of the curatorial essay in the exhibition catalog, for her research and documentation of this phase of the fabric printing marketing and reception. So, at the first conference of the Arctic Cooperatives held in 1963, the cooperatives asked the federal government and the Cooperative Union of Canada to set up a marketing organization to distribute the work of Inuit artists. To this end, Canadian Arctic Producers, or CAP, was established in 1965. CAP staff traveled throughout Canada, the United States, and Europe, promoting Inuit products in the summer of 1966. In the summer of 1966, John Patton, the sales manager of the Fabrics Division, toured across Canada with the Kinngait Textiles. Patton presented samples of 12 designs, including Pars, Proud Geese, Ovilutunalese, Friendly Whales, Inuktiaktu Pudlats, Many Eskimos, Pudla Pudlat, Spirits and Birds, Mary Samueli's Fish and Shadows, and these samples were all printed by Kinangait. Patton's tour was the first time the fabrics were shown publicly. They were met with a very positive reaction. Toronto Star journalist Marie Moreau called them brilliantly executed, and Patton reported that, quote, "The reception in Ontario and across the prairies has been excellent. If promises turn into orders, the Eskimos will have a lot of work on their hands." Patton's marketing efforts on this tour were targeted directly to architects, department stores, and contractors, and public works officials, indicating that the fabrics would be available to the public in the future. Patton said the specialized marketing was part of a strategy to, quote, "protect the Eskimo from the bargain basement," unquote. The enthusiastic reception of the artist-printed textiles made in Kinngait was not an isolated phenomenon. In the 1950s and 60s, textiles were designed for commercial sales by leading artists, including Pablo Picasso, Joan Miro, Marc Chagall, Henry Moore, Andy Warhol, Sandra Rhodes, and Sonia Delaunay. Brands such as Marimekko were also prominent in the 1950s, and Alma Houston, head of the Fine Arts Division of CAP, visited Finland and purchased Marimekko fabrics in 1967 and 1968. As Dr. Rachel Gottlieb wrote in the exhibition catalog, Thor Hansen Crafting a Canadian Style, artists and designers in Canada also embraced printed textiles as an inexpensive and accessible process to reach wider audiences, exemplified in the work of designer Thor Hansen, who used what he termed distinct Canadian symbols on printed textiles in an effort to create a national style in the handicrafts. Two years after the silkscreen printing on fabric was undertaken in Kinngait, the designs were entered into a national design competition. The Design 67 Awards were initiated by the Department of Industry and the National Design Council to, quote, encourage increased production and sale of well-designed Canadian products and stimulate the development of new designs for Canada's centennial celebrations and Expo 67, the World's Fair, which would take place in Montreal in the summer of 1967. The Design Awards placed a particular emphasis on new design development by offering monetary awards and creating opportunities to match products with manufacturers. The West Baffin Eskimo Co-op submitted designs by 12 artists into the new product design category. Their submission read as follows: unbleached linen fabric featuring various silk screen designs available in 36-inch and 42-inch widths for an estimated cost of $5.95 to $10 a yard. The fabrics were accepted into the new product category and won one of 58 awards for exceptional new design. The co-op received a $1,000 award intended to help defray the costs of prototype development. Only 14 designs were awarded $1,000 or more, which suggests that the co-op's fabrics represented some of the best and most promising designs in the competition. Winning the award resulted in a significant amount of exposure for the fabrics. They were featured at Design 67 design marts in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Information sheets about them were sent to corporate buyers in Canada and abroad, and the win was covered in newspapers and magazines across the country. As stated above, the goal of the Design Awards was to stimulate development, production, and visibility of excellent Canadian design ahead of centennial celebrations and the Expo 67 World's Fair. Inuit art and design were highly visible at Expo, incorporated into the interior design of spaces such as the restaurant, the Canadian Pavilion, and model suites in Moishe Safdie's experimental housing project, Habitat. Fabulous Geese by Anirnak Oshutuk is seen here, used as drapery in the background of an image of children's art classroom furniture in the Canadian Pavilion. The image caption focuses on the easels and makes no mention of the drapery fabric. Ishahungato Putaguk's Birds in Flight was also used as curtains in the art center, faintly visible here in the background of a music class on the top right. The fabrics were used to decorate some of the suites in the Habitat housing development that were open to the public as exhibits during Expo. The suites were designed by Barbara McLennan, a decorator service consultant from Chatelaine magazine, using furniture and art donated and loaned by design companies and art galleries. Canadian art producers supplied the Kinngait fabrics, which were used for drapes and bedspreads. Unfortunately, we haven't images so far. In this image, Inukjuakju's Many Eskimos print is seen in the background of an image of a sofa in Habitat, possibly as a lampshade. Interest in the fabrics was boosted by the Canadian Arctic Producers Promotional Tour, the Design Awards, and their inclusion at Expo 67, as well as through marketing and exhibitions. Some examples of the venues the fabrics were advertised and displayed in the mid-60s include the Cape Dorset print catalog, the 1966 print catalog, in a section that also advertised the annual calendar, postcards, and Christmas cards. A spread on Inuit art in Los Angeles-based magazine Designers West, and in Chatelaine magazine's list of must-have centennial souvenirs. They were sold at galleries such as Snow Goose Gallery in Ottawa and featured in an exhibition and sale of Inuit art at Eaton's department store in Montreal in 1967. In the same year, an exhibition at the Winnipeg Art Gallery featured fabrics by Inirnik Ashutuk, Ishahungato Putuguk, Unak Juakju Padlat, Pitsalak Ashuna, Sharni Putuguk, and 2 unknown artists alongside ceramics from Rankin Inlet, promoting the fabrics and ceramics as 2 new forms of Inuit art. Around this time, interior designers wanted to work with the fabrics, and individuals were looking to purchase them, demonstrating the impact of these efforts. Despite the promising response, the limited sales records that exist indicate that the fabrics did not sell well, and in January 1968, the fabric printing department at Kinngait was abolished. Though fabric printing in Kinngait stopped at this point, new prints were still being designed by artists and were being printed in southern Canada. Printing in the south, in addition to the north, may have begun as early as 1966. Much of the marketing and design of the fabrics promoted their use as drapery, marketed towards architects, interior designers, and public works officials, and the scale of the patterns made them suitable for use in large spaces. This necessitated the printing of large quantities, which was not possible in the Kinngait facilities. Printing in the south enabled the co-op to meet demand and make sales which benefited the Inuit artists who designed them. In the late 1960s, the designs were also licensed out for other uses. One well-documented example is Toronto-based fashion designer Anne Gamble, who obtained the rights to reproduce artists' designs for women's garments in 1968. Designs such as Pudlo Pudlat, spirits, and birds were hand-screened onto fabrics to create jumpsuits, coats, tunics, and suits. Gamble's designs retailed for $175 to $500, and the artists who created the original designs received 5% of each sale. Photographs taken in Kinngait by Arctic ethnographer Norman Hallandy in 1968 show 2 Inuit artists, Kanoyuak Ashavak and Melia Jaw, wearing dresses made from the fabrics. Ashavak is shown wearing a dress with her own print on the sleeve. It is not yet known who designed or made these dresses. The late 1960s represent another period of experimentation for the Kinngait fabric designs, as their use was licensed out to companies and designers for use in products ranging from fashion to luggage sets. In the early 1970s, co-op manager Terry Ryan asked Doug Matenia, a textile print specialist based in Toronto, to assess whether large-scale fabric printing in Kinngait was viable. Matenia found that the logistics, chemicals, and cost made printing up north unsustainable. Shortly thereafter, Matenia and Robert Eaton founded a company called Inuit, which is under license from Dorset Fine Arts to develop and sell Inuit graphic art designs interpreted into commercial textile products, such as apparel and accessories. These images are examples of some of the earliest Inuit products, where the same designs from pieces in our collection were used for cruisewear, men's shirting, and scarves. And this was photographed in Kinngait. Promotional images were taken in Kinngait, and the knitwear designs were sold through Eaton's. In this installation shot, Doug Matenia generously had a shirt printed up based on the fabric design next to it, which we're able to display in the exhibition. New fabric designs were developed in the following years. Matenia would work from a drawing, extracting and translating elements to create new designs that were approved by the co-op and the artist or their estate before being put into production. Nunu still exists today, translating Inuit graphic art imagery into textiles such as scarves and most recently handmade carpets. Okay, sorry. Throughout the active years of the Textile Printing Initiative, efforts were made to keep the project in Kinngait, where it created jobs and income for artists and afforded them direct control over the products. However, the nature of the textiles and the way they were marketed made them incompatible with production in Kinngait, leading to the evolution toward the textiles now produced through Nunu. Fabrics and clothing with printed designs continue to represent the stories, landscapes, and lives of Inuit today. Inuit fashion designers Tarlik Duffy of Ugly Fish, Martha Kiak of Inukshik, and Nooks Lindell of Hanani Design offer contemporary perspectives on the textiles. Each are establishing brands that blend Inuit cultural heritage with contemporary fashion, creating innovative ways to represent their culture. Inspired by the Kinngait textiles, each created original printed fabric designs for the exhibition. And in the case of Kiak and Lindell, these were made into garments. And Duffy created a textile print called Power Lines. When the designers viewed the Kinngait textiles for the first time, they expressed an immediate connection with the works. As Kiak observed, looking at these images on the fabrics, you can tell how everything they knew about the world is connected and see their strong worldview. And these are her sketches. Like the Kinngait artists of 60 years ago, the new generation draws inspiration for their own experiments with printed textiles from their culture. This print, Power Lines by Tarlik Duffy, she says, power lines have an unassuming yet imposing presence in the North. I've always wondered how it was before they were here. She also produces leggings printed with syllabics, as she says, quote, to preserve our language and keep it visible through fashion, and also designs jewelry. While Lindell describes how his designs are inspired by our wildlife, our land, and our culture, and then taking that inspiration and giving it a modern twist. These works of these artists speak to the continued significance of the early printed fabrics and the relevance today. We hope that this work will inspire others to build on the research that's being done and add to the information on the Textile Printing Initiative. Sorry, missed a slide here, apologies. I would like to acknowledge the Inuit artists and printmakers who designed and produced these remarkable works 60 years ago, and those who have contributed their knowledge of this fabric printing enterprise. We hope that Printed Textiles from Kinngait Studios will shine a light on the story of this innovative textile printing initiative, which is resurgent relevance today. We hope this work will inspire others to build on the research that has been done and add to the information on the Textile Printing Initiative. Recently, the museum has become an official partner of Inuit Futures and Arts Leadership, an initiative that aims to support Inuit and Inuvialuit in Canada in their pursuit of higher education and professional opportunities in all aspects of the arts and humanities. The museum is hoping to provide an opportunity for a student from this program to work with the Inuit textile collection in the future. The exhibition will tour, and we're putting together a schedule for it to travel across Canada and to Kinngait over the next couple of years. The exhibition was made possible through the collaboration and contributions of many who have advised, guided, and supported the project, and I wish to thank them all. These powerful graphic representations of the natural world express Inuit values and culture, while preserving Inuit knowledge, oral histories, and legends, and demonstrate the importance of printed fabrics in the ongoing evolution of Inuit graphic arts. And as a final note, we have a catalog of the exhibition available You can order through our online shop, and these are the contributors. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Susan.
I really enjoyed today's presentation, and I was surprised to realize that I've seen several of the fabrics before, and that some are more familiar to me than I would have anticipated. It's a very interesting exhibition, and I really hope that all of us can make our way to the museum to see it in person. I want to thank you very much for making this presentation today, and hopefully we'll see you in the museum itself. We have a number of upcoming events. The next will be on May 2nd, returning to the first Sunday of the month, and that is called If the Cups Could Talk, Pottery in Victorian Painting and Literature with Rachel Gottlieb. Then on the 23rd of May, we're going to have the Ornamentum Magazine 15th anniversary panel discussion. And there's information about who the panelists include in our newsletter that was just sent out, I think possibly yesterday or this morning. And you can go to the website to learn more about that. We're still in the process of scoping out what will happen in June. Then we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in the fall. We are anticipating the annual symposium the first weekend in October. So stay tuned for all of that. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on May 2nd.
Thank you, everyone.